All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order. So our agenda tonight is quite simple. What we're going to do tonight is we're going to review two of the items that Justin and Wendy have put forward. One dealing with open space overlays, and the second one dealing with porta potties. Okay. Got an email that came in from Justin that was sent to me and then forwarded to you by Rhonda. And so I'm following that document. So the first one I'm going to look at in this discussion is going to be looking at the open space overlay district. Has everybody taken the time to look at that?
Yeah.
That's the one that says it's from the town of Eden?
That's the one from Eden.
Yeah.
So this is one of the things that we were discussing with them as far as putting it into the document. It is going to show up in section 6, identifying section 6 would be the Creekside open space, to see if what's your thoughts in putting some text together that we can respond back to them. That would fall into section 6 of the LWRP book itself. And by the way, I did print out the LWRP, and so far it's that thick. So, and right now we don't have chapter 7 and all the way through all the index items that go into this document, which means it's going to probably get probably a third bigger than it is currently. And that means the document is going to be pretty much the size of the last document that we actually produced in 2006. So where do we want to start on dealing with the open space? Who's got thoughts that they want to get on the table right now? Eric's calling me. Eric?
Says he's
Yes.
connecting.
Yeah, you're on the screen. Oh, wait a minute, I'm coming out. Hold on a second. Rhonda, who's at the front door?
Is it locked?
I didn't think it was locked. I came in. So, Paul, did you get a chance to look at this?
Yeah, but I can't find my notes. It's not much help.
No, that's not helping me. All right, anybody else have the second thought of it?
No.
No, okay. So I guess in reviewing it, the reason we were looking at the open space overlay district was it was something that we wanted to look at for preserving open space on Grand Island. Where do we want to begin with this? But let's get Eric in the room here in a second, and I'll then start dissecting this. The purpose, in accordance with the recommendations and policies of the town of Eden in its comprehensive plan, this overlay is designed to preserve to the maximum extent feasible the important environmental features associated with major stream corridors within town. This will help to ensure the interconnection of open space elements in the town, preserving rural character and scenic views, enhance flood protection, minimize non-point source pollution, and preserving wildlife habitats, and protect the quantity to these corridors that contribute to both the community's character and property values. That was the intent of this ordinance that was being proposed. Okay.
Which ordinance are the city talking about?
I'm going to talk about the open space first.
Okay.
You have it in front.
The overlay?
Yes.
Can I just get some clarification on what the purpose of the overlay is in relation to all the other things that we've been already putting together? Like, I don't understand what it's intended to do.
Yes. The intention was to give more protection. Right now you have this item basically is looking to implement this under section 6 was implementation. This was putting more emphasis on protecting the stream corridors of Grand Island. Right now you have the 100-foot buffer, the 50 feet on either side of the corridor. This one basically is talking about an overlay that actually would turn around and be allowing them within an overlay within the zoning of the town itself. So it's adding one more layer of management to the corridors.
So it's a zoning recommendation then?
It's going to go into the zoning book, yes.
Okay, so that's where the extra layer comes into play, is actually making adjustments to the zoning along with the rest of the document. Okay,
Yes.
makes more
Jim,
sense now.
Jim, if I might add, those setbacks vary by the classification of the creeks right now. So like a class C stream might be 50 feet, class B gets to be 80, I think, and then class A is, I think, 100 feet setback. So this is something to improve upon that, I take it.
I would say so. I mean, we can go through the purpose of the creek, what we can do piece by piece by piece, so we get a real clarification of exactly what this is all about. And maybe that's what we ought to be doing. I gave you the opening as to what is the purpose. And there's two purposes. One that I just read to you, and the second one is the overlay shall supplement the underlying zoning restrictions and provide for harmonious, safe, and orderly development within the overlay. That's the second purpose of the code. Boundary descriptions. The locations and boundaries of the overlay shall encompass those areas identified and there'll be a division map within our master plan with the title of open space corridors. These include the lands along the creeks, and I'm just going to say creeks, and they have named all their creeks. The overlay shall encompass all parcels fronting on these waterways in those areas demarcated on the vision map as being within those open space corridors. So again, the document, does everybody have a copy of this in front of you by your computers?
Yeah, I do. Yes.
Okay. So Paul, have you gotten your notes?
Yeah, I found my notes.
You found your notes. So do you want to still go through this piece by piece and then give your notes?
No, we can go through it piece by piece.
Okay.
'Cause I think I would like to have the perspective you think you're going after here.
I'm at the point where the only perspective I got out of this was looking at the stream corridors and how we would manage them within the community of Grand Island. So right now you have what John had described is each classification of a stream has a different setback in mannerism. So this actually would turn around and be a layer that you would lay onto the zoning map that would have the boundaries that are actually defined by those areas. I mean, you've got the boundaries, you do not don't intrude on the 100-foot or the 65-foot or whatever it is based on the classification of the stream. The question is, how do you manage that? What is the intent of it? I mean, what are you going to do and what can be done in that space? Because right now it says you don't go there. So if it goes through a subdivision, then how do you manage it?
But how does
Well,
this,
and, you know, from an environmental perspective, I'd manage it by not doing anything there. Let it just grow back, natural cover. And then it filters the surface water drainage that would be headed for that particular water body. The classification of streams on Grand Island, I don't think anybody's A, John, right? We've got C, maybe the Niagara River is, but not the tributaries. I think most of them are C class, aren't they?
No, they go from A right down through D, actually.
Who's got an A classification?
Probably Big Six, probably all the major Woods Creek, Spicer Creek, Gun Creek.
See, when I did the
yeah.
permits for the bridge crossing for Big Six, right above the marina, it was only class B.
Well, I know we have Class A. I have to look on our official map.
Okay, well, the nice thing about the classification is that it's established by the state. And
Right.
it's pretty well rigid and regulated. Shouldn't change much unless the the nature of the environment changes in a good way, actually. So I don't know where, the one thing that I was concerned about with these setbacks is how'd they come up with the numbers that they did? They have the best classification, what, has 100? And then they
Yes,
start
I
grading
believe that's
down from
correct.
there. And no, I mean, if I was a developer, I'd say, well, where's your, what's the scientific justification for why did you go from 100 to 60 to 40 or something like that?
Well, that's on our official map. I believe those classifications have been in place
No, I'm
predating
not
my
talking,
employment with
no,
the
I'm
town.
not talking about the classifications. They stand in concrete. I'm talking about the setbacks from them. In other words, a stream that's a class B stream
Right.
has a certain setback thing in this proposal here, which might be different from a class A or a class C. So how did they come about the different distances?
I don't know the exact answer to that, Paul, but it was done long before I was employed with the town. I
Well, we're
imagine
talking
there's
about,
some,
this is the town of Eden we're talking about here. So how did they
Oh.
come up with it?
I don't know.
I would, like you said, I think these are state classifications though.
No. I understand their state classifications. I mean, are the state classifications dictating the setback?
Correct. That's my understanding.
All right, I like to have that confirmed because I know that they classified A, B, and C, and they will give you the environmental characteristics of each of the classifications, but I didn't know that there were setbacks, specific numerical setbacks set to those.
They always have been, as long as I've been associated with Grand Island.
And I would agree.
Right.
Um,
All right, so we're going to follow, then we would follow the setbacks for the standards then, for
Yes.
for what classification they are.
Yes, let's assume that.
And
Okay,
EPA
so-
phase 2 stormwater regulations now come into play with all this as well. So they're going to require those buffer zones as well that you're talking about.
Right. So you have to be real careful about that. We have a lake up there off of, was that Stony Point that we had a lot of controversy with, where everybody mowed right to the water's edge. They should have left it in a natural state. In fact, the Corps permit said to leave it in a natural state. So did the state permits, but nobody did it. So they ended up they were setbacks, but the setbacks weren't maintained in natural cover.
You're talking about Majestic Woods.
Majestic Woods is a good example, yeah. You can also see examples of that along Woods Creek, where people have mowed right up to the edge of the water. So there's good reason to put those filtration requirements in there, as long as they're enforced.
And can I just ask something about the building and the setbacks and everything? So we're talking about these kinds of regulations as stringent as I sort of think they really are. Not that I'm not saying that they're not important, but this would be similar to people who took the liberty to build on Lake Ontario. And then when the Army Corps of Engineer had to try to save Mississauga, Canada, the place is all flooded, but they had built in an area that was actually considered not an area that was buildable, and they did it and they lost their properties and things of that sort, but they really shouldn't have been building in that area. So even here on Gun Creek, technically then you could call people grandfathered in, but these setbacks would actually have some of their buildings actually encumbered by the setback. Yes, no?
John?
Well, typically, if we're issuing a building permit, those setbacks have to be adhered to. So what you're saying is like prior to today's world, Deb, yeah, they could be in those setbacks. Most people really didn't. I mean, they understood it's a creek, it might flood, and they don't want to be right up against it, so.
Well, it's not only that, but we're also talking about maintenance, right? And we're talking about, I mean, I think overall too, there's some issues that as long as I've been on here, that if we don't keep the sediment and we don't keep the rainwater flowing and we don't take care of the creeks, we also encumber fish, we encumber a lot of animals, and then you got the tree falling down, like whose responsibility is when it falls across the creek. And now somebody can say, well, my tree fell in the 100 feet. Now it's not my responsibility.
It's still their
right?
property.
It's still their property.
That argument doesn't hold water. That's still their
That's-
property. If the tree
okay.
falls from your property across the creek and impedes the flow, you have the responsibility to remove it,
even though it's in the setback.
even though it's in the setback.
Okay,
Just like your front yard of your house, there's a setback for the front yard of your house. And
But
you
even-
have to maintain your property.
okay. But if you want to come in and do maintenance and chew up the whole landscape, you have the right to do that.
Well, the idea, I think, with the overlay district is to define what can and can't be done in those
Yeah.
setbacks.
Yeah, okay. That's just checking because I'm right here on Gun Creek and, the trees are huge and the properties are built right out to the edge, a lot of them. And so, and I don't discuss it with a lot of people, but I'm just, in the event something were to happen, you know what I mean? I'm just trying to think if the stringency of the setbacks would really affect the people here in the event of an event, not generally overall.
And
in the
it comes
town.
back down to, we mentioned Majestic Woods, people have mowed right out to the edge of the lake.
That's what
They have put docks in, I think.
Mhm.
Things that they probably shouldn't have done. It comes down to a question of enforcement too, so.
Yeah, and that's where I'm kind of going with it. Are we protecting everybody that, are we making it, are a few people only affected by public policy, or are we causing a lot of damage in general because, and limiting access to many people, right? Public policy by enforcing something like this, when here we are so water laden and almost an island, which is very different from Eden, that sure starts the 18-mile creek. However, what people would do in Eden is much different with their water access than what we would do here on Grand Island.
And you're right, that's why we're looking at this code to find out if it can be modified to fit what we're trying to accomplish.
Deb, the same kind of situation exists out on eastern Long Island, where you have tidal marshes cover all of the shoreline, and you have private property owners that have property that they own those wetlands, but they're only allowed to get to the border of those wetlands. And there's a permitting process down there that allows them to have access to the water by cutting a path or something like that. So, it has to be a process to allow reasonable use of the access to navigable waters without destroying the entire ecosystem. See, on Majestic Woods, they just destroyed the whole ecosystem. So, everybody just mowed it down, and they were very defiant about it. I remember back when we were working on that, and I was on the Conservation Commission at the time it was called. People were nasty and mean about it. They didn't want anybody in there telling them what to do. And they said they were going to mow right down to the edge and do something about it if you think you can. And of course, nobody did anything.
Yeah, and
That I live there, so I would weigh in that also the developer sold the property based on it being lakefront, told you to imagine your paddle boats on the dock. So you have people who moved in on a premise that was presented other ways to them. And so in defense of my lovely neighbors at Majestic Woods, they were defending the things that they were told when they bought the property. And that's inherent to some issues.
Yeah,
well, but
I know who
go
the
ahead.
developer was. He was actually
Fredo.
was a persistent violator with the Corps. We have no control over the way he marketed the property. We only controlled what he was supposed to be doing. The trouble is that when it came down to the brass tacks of making that stand, we weren't able to do it.
Okay.
Well, but here's really, and we just all heard it, is that, okay, if a tree falls down, it's your responsibility. However, you can't do anything that we don't tell you you can do in the event of there's something that happens. Do you own it or don't you own it?
Right.
So.
So we have
It's a
been
little
dealing with that over this process of planning. The Corps or the DEC have jurisdiction over the creek corridors and their channels.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
the
Right.
premise that has been brought forward is that the Corps and the DEC have basically told the town of Grand Island, we're going to permit you to come in and take out the trees, but you cannot disturb the root. So therefore, you can take it down, take out the tree, to stop it from, damming up the river, but the route cannot be disturbed because that's actually may change the channel. So if you want to take the root out, you better even have to put a plan in place as to how you're going to minimize the damage to the channel. So those are extra things. I'm running through the questions that are actually in this document. And what I'm getting at is one, we're basically through the planning board indicating there is a regulation on a class A, B, C, D corridor, and therefore each one has a different setback as far as their designation of A, B, or C, or D. So this one's making the assumption they're all 100 feet, and that's kind of like the given when we're talking about it with subdivisions. A lot of this is talking to the planning board that actually is saying to the planning board, well, when a developer comes in, then we want you to turn around and put in this overlay into the projects. In other words, they're going to use this as a tool to make sure that if you have a lake like Majestic Woods, it becomes a lake and it has an overlay, and the overlay is going to set its boundaries. And these are the things that it will achieve. Where right now, all they're doing is saying you need to have a 100-foot setback and don't do anything about it. Don't invade it, don't correct it, don't do anything. And after the owners take control, well, it's out of their control. So, and a lot of people don't even know there's a 100-foot setback on the creek. So they do go right to the creek. So this is basically layering it by saying on the official map of the town of Grand Island, it's going to reflect a zone that's going to go along the creek corridor. And this is what, and then looking at the definition here, it's basically defining what that is and what is its purpose and what are the goals and what are the behaviors that it will tolerate, and then how you would actually then deal with it. In other words, I'm going to put a shed close to the corridor. Well, it's going to improve the shed, but it's also going to improve if you put a shed that's 10 by 10, that's what it is. If it falls apart or blows apart because lightning hits it, you're only permitted to put a 10 by 10 back up. You're not allowed to put a 25 by 25 up without actually going back and asking permission and getting a permit to do another shed in that area. So this is adding more definition in management to the stream corridor system within the town of Grand Island. And then it reflecting on the official map of the town of Grand Island on stream corridors. I mean, that's what I'm reading when I'm reading through this document. That's what I think his intention is that we don't have a management system in place now. It's just saying it was 100 foot when the developer came in. All owners should have assumed that's the truth, but they're not. So then this adds a layer of management to it, saying there's clearly a boundary showing the overlay open space of that stream corridor. Does that make sense to you now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jim, the original intent of the setbacks with the stream classifications that are on the official map of the town of Grand Island was due to flood damage prevention. Because at that time,
That's what
FEMA
I
had
thought.
not issued flood hazard maps yet.
Right.
So now that we have the FEMA maps as well, showing 100-year floodplains, 500-year floodplains, et cetera, those are going to take some precedence as well too. So some of that has to come into play here along with
So-
the other things. I mean, they were
Yep.
just kind of,
Knew it.
nobody did a complete hydrologic study on every stream on Grand Island. They said, okay, in this reach, it's a class D. When I get a little further downstream, it's a class C. As I move further, again, it becomes class B, and then maybe class A as I'm out close to the river because of the size and the nature of this creek.
And I agree with all that. The question will be now, by reading what I just read, do we want to have in place an examination of developing a open space overlay district to be overlaid on our stream corridors within the town of Grand Island?
Yes.
Yeah, I would think so.
Yep, especially because of the floodplain. I mean, that was something that's been driving my mind a little bit. I can't believe it actually came up in this conversation. So the ultimate goal of it is public policy would be to protect the ownership in a sense, but yet, you know, the only thing I worry about, it becomes the arguments. And, you know, you brought that up too, is the people that have already built too close to the water in the event of flooding, what we saw on Lake Ontario, and then that tree falls in the woods. Does anybody hear it type thing? Well, not whose fault is it? Who needs to clean it up? Trees are not cheap to remove, you know, so, but do we need it? Absolutely. Going forward, we can't look behind. There's a lot of people that'll be in trouble if we really get that kind of flooding
Okay.
and something happens.
Well, a lot of that is already covered, Deb, by the FEMA regulations.
Yeah, but you'd have
No,
to
I
be
mean, you have a
declared.
flood, you have two things. You have a floodway and a floodplain. And Paul
Yeah.
can speak a lot more eloquently on this stuff than I can. So,
But
I'll
going
defer
for
to Paul.
new,
Those
new
standards,
development.
those
For
standards that
something
FEMA
new.
has come up, the standards that FEMA has come up with are pretty rigid. I mean, when people go for mortgages, they have to get flood insurance. They have to determine
Exactly.
whether they're in the floodplain or not. And I think as far as this language goes here, if you wanted to talk about setback requirements, you say setbacks is a class A, B, or C, or D, or the 100-year floodplain, which is whichever is most restrictive.
Yeah,
Because they may not always agree. All right.
You're 100% right.
yeah,
So the floodplain is a really good standard to work with.
yeah.
And I know that the town has enforced that. I saw it on North Colony when somebody built a shed in the middle of, right in over the
That's
edge.
true,
of the
but
creek.
the studies only went so far up the creek, so we have to be careful with that. We may need to look at
Well,
this a
that's what
little further upstream.
John,
Well,
that's what we
that's
said
the
in the,
overlay.
we've said in the LWRP, we need a complete hydrologic study for the island anyway.
Yeah.
That's one of the projects that are recommended in the LWRP.
Right. So
So Jim, do you know any answers if we, as a town, or has Eden run into it, where once we would do this overlay, does that change? Like insurance requirements, or no, people that have,
No.
but it,
you're in a
okay, they don't look at it any
federal
different.
program. Bottom line, they wouldn't change anything.
Okay,
Let's, Eric's got something. Let's get Eric on.
I just had a question. I'm just not understanding I hear setbacks, you know, like that's building, and then you're talking about people who cut their lawn. So does a setback include traversing your own property and to what extent? And then I guess I don't understand when you're saying these things, when you're describing one thing that's in place already, and then you're gonna add this, how does that make our lives better? And I'm asking that out of ignorance. I don't understand the difference of what we have in this ABC. It seems like there's already a lot of regulation in this area. How are we improving it? I love
Okay.
a one sentence maybe version of that. So
I think that's where we're gonna have to go through this document, because I turned around and talked about the purpose that I read out to you. Then I went to the boundary, they're basically saying all the stream corridors. Now the objectives, the special regulations contained herein, which regulates and controls all proposed development and redevelopment within the boundaries of the open space overlay shall be founded upon the following objectives. Important environmental features shall be preserved to the greatest extent feasible. Okay. 2, important environmental features shall be mapped to illustrate existing conditions for all site plan subdivision applications to enable effective site development analysis. 3, development should be cited to minimize adverse impacts to water quality, fish, wildlife habitats, freshwater waterways, waterlands, stormwater runoff, septic systems, or any other activity on the site. 4, to the greatest extent feasible, new construction shall be sited to a minimum of 100 feet from the stream corridor or outside the designated floodplain area. Whereas whichever is greater, in order to establish a buffer adjacent to the waterway to absorb flood waters, trap settlement, and protect habitats and preserve scenic values. Have you seen this?
I was missing a page. I knew there was something that said clear cutting and it's not in the document I have.
It's two
I
seconds.
just think I'm missing page 2 here.
I've seen it, Jim. The problem I have with everything you've said so far is that it's kind of subjective. Who's making this analysis?
That's my
Who
mom.
decides whether you're at one level or not?
I think that if you know how site plans and subdivisions are put forward, that's gonna be the requirement of the developer to actually turn around and submit. They will have to, by their cost, to actually turn around and come up with the boundary or wherever it's gonna be within that area. Because what
I
you're.
get that, but you know, I worked for consultants for a while after the Corps. I worked for them for 8 years. And you know, if you got a good consultant team, you'll get a very in-depth result that might drive it one way. And another set of consultants will come up a different way. Who in the town is going to decide where the fair ground is?
I would agree. I would agree with that statement, but what I say this is, then when the town turns around and actually turns around and puts a overlay onto the stream corridor prior to any development, that they're gonna end up running smack into that overlay. The overlay is gonna be
Right.
there on the property. So therefore, when they start to develop, that overlay is gonna basically kick in and say, you have to answer the questions of the overlay that's actually on the property boundary. And now it's gonna be up to them to answer.
So a developer let's take item 4. Developer says to you, okay, I get all of that. Who decides whether I should be 100 feet or 75 feet from the designated floodplain area? I mean, who makes that decision for me? I can argue, and I'm a developer, I can argue it because I need every square foot I can to make a profit from my investment. You know, what do I have to preserve here? What's being preserved? I mean,
Well, And I believe
it's way open-ended, you know?
I'm only gonna throw.
Well,
what
I think the bigger problem is,
Whatever the designated corridor is, if it's an A, B, C, or D, there's already a bigger agency that's defined that number, and that's the number they're gonna have to meet, not us.
yeah, but I think the bigger problem is gonna be, and I hate to use the marketing, which I've already heard you talk about, but you know, then where do we go with enforcement? Because now we're trying to say habitat, all these objectives we're trying to preserve, which I mean, I love it here only because of the nature. I mean, because of the nature so much, is that what's going to stop if you have a Majestic Woods or some sort of development, once they would pass it, say, oh yeah, we agree to all of this, we haven't marketed and things like that, and all of a sudden the cattails grow up and somebody goes with a machete and just chops them down around the way. So and that's the landowner, right?
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of that in the past, Deb. I think that this thing is trying to do is set a line now for the future.
Yeah.
What's happened in the past, there's not much you can do about it. They're grandfathered in. I mean,
Well,
they have a lot of legal defense to exist the way they are, in violation of what they would have been if they built the stuff after the standards were put in place. So I think we have to look forward. The question you have to ask yourself, if you don't do something, what's going to happen to the rest of Grand Island that you're so concerned about preserving?
Well, and the other thing is there a cost that comes with this?
Okay,
You
okay.
know,
Let me put a parallel to this a little bit. We have
Meaning
something called, there's something we call an EED, an Enhanced
Yep.
Environmental District. Are you
Right.
familiar with an EED?
Yep.
Okay.
yep,
An EED falling on the developer's property, they need to define it and mark it so that they don't encroach on the EED. Right, John? Love me.
Yes, that's correct.
That's correct. So we've had a number of developers actually coming in, had an EED on their property. They then had to go out and actually delineate it, mark it, and actually put marker points that are permanent marker points saying you do not go past this point. If you are, when you're your house and you see that boundary marker, which
They
is
can develop,
in the
they can
ground,
develop within an EED, but there are certain restrictions that come with that development.
correct. So the bottom line is this is under the same umbrella as that. So an EED can be defined, can be delineated. This one's
Yep.
doing the same thing. It's setting up a boundary line through the creek corridors, basically saying we want to preserve these things, and here's what's in them that we want to preserve. That's what I'm going through right now. So
Yeah.
it can be, and I'm going to advocate just because I want to, if I advocate, then you guys can make it not so, or say, no, we don't want that. So that's the role I'm going to play tonight.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
okay, so the issue is, this is going to be similar EED kind of like regulation that actually is going to be an overlay, like the EED is an overlay on the property. This one's going to be basically talking about stream corridors and protecting stream corridors and what can happen within that corridor, similar to what is regulated inside the EED. That's
So
the-
these are gonna protect stream corridors covered under the LWRP, or all stream corridors regardless of whether they're covered under the LWRP.
I think stream corridors are protected regardless of whatever we do. All we're doing is making a better definition for what we're expecting to happen within our own code, and actually reflecting it on a map. So when a developer actually goes to develop the property, it sees that it has an overlay on it.
Right, because the
Yeah,
DEC
but-
takes over.
I'm not sure you're answering the question. Does that go all the way to the headwater wetlands? Because in some of the streams we have in the LWRP, for example, that we've identified as important, they've not been identified to their headwaters.
That's a good question. I don't have an answer.
I still don't really
So,
understand.
because in reading this thing, I don't see anything here about headwater wetlands. I mean, that's your basic source of clean water at the beginning of the creek, at the tributary to the Niagara River, and then from there it goes down. But, and you're gonna
Yes, but
protect
aren't
it
those
along its
already
entire
protected
border,
under
but
federal and
obviously
state
protection for
statutes?
the wetlands at the
Right,
top.
they're already under state statutes.
Stream corridors are not giving significant.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you gotta be careful about state statutes and who's working on what, because it's 12.4 acres for the New York State DEC. That means everything under 12.4 acres is vulnerable.
Right,
And if
but
the
And
Corps
the
of
the-
federal
Engineers
government
decides to
controls the
have-
remainder.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but
the
the Corps-
only other problem is that if people start building in the middle of the island, if the headwaters are in the middle of the island, which we've already determined, is that possibly the way that they build, if those aren't considered a setback, that the water and the creation of roof runoff and things of that sort could change that whole headwater that doesn't have the overlay technically in effect and would ruin the creek, right, Paul?
You're right. Actually, what'll happen is that not only will that happen, but it'll degrade the corridor you are trying to protect.
Right,
So,
because it'll be polluted because it's a different kind, it's not clean run of water.
it'll be polluted, eroded, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it will suffer an ill effect if you don't start at the headwaters. So,
Then the question is, how do you define the headwater? Because the headwaters can change over time.
Well, then,
Well-
so does the LWRP. We have to define them today and, right?
Well, I mean, a
And-
developer comes in, the developer needs to come in and delineate what is the wetlands within their property. And it can change from time to time. So the question is, does the overlay not have flexibility where it is what it is, but now how do we redefine the delineation of what the wetland is itself? I think this one's looking at stream corridors as much as possible. I don't see where it's talking headwaters at all.
well, that's one of the things
That's
I
important.
recognize as being absent there. You know,
Yeah, especially here, because we know that the island fills up in the middle and drains out through the end, through the sides.
Well,
Yeah.
If you go
All in
to
all,
the
guys.
federal regulations, for protection of waters, they have classifications where you start at the headwaters, you have the major corridors, where you have the small channels, then you have the major corridors, and then you have the access to navigable waters. I mean, each one of those corridors has its own special designation, but they all work together. And water quality is very important, and results are very important down at the mouth of that creek when it ends up in the Niagara River or, Lake Erie or Lake Ontario, wherever it goes. So, you have to start somewhere, and you should start at the beginning.
And
You're
one of
right,
the
and
things,
they have to
and
do a
prob-
delineation.
right, and probably one of the differences between Grand Island and Eden is the water flows through, it's already a creek. We are Grand Island, the water starts here and makes the creeks. So we just probably have to enhance our work a little bit more and put a little bit more more meat into it
Well, I
than
mean,
what
we-
Eden had to do.
Yeah. most creeks are all
You're
terminated.
right, because the,
Your body
you're
of
right,
water.
because the entire watershed is encompassed by Grand Island. Now,
Right.
Eden has a geographic limitation, you know, and the watersheds are outside of that. So,
Right,
but Grand Island has everything. If it starts on Grand Island, it ends on Grand Island before it goes into Niagara River. So we have control of the whole drainage cycle.
yep, yep. And you know, the way we're building and how much people love being over here, if our goal is to really protect the habitat in every capacity that we possibly can, the trees, the everything, then we need to think a little bit stronger, actually.
Okay, so,
So if you have these setbacks will preserve water quality, but they provide corridors for wildlife movement and so on. So, you know, your species diversity and all of the ecological aspects that go with it are actually maintained or enhanced by keeping those borders in place. But when you take them out and mow to the water's edge, they're gone.
all right. Okay, so getting back into the definition of the objectives, number 5 was the amount of land clearing shall be minimal and development shall be designated around the significant resources on the site. Number 6, important habitats on the site should be identified and new development shall avoid these areas to greatly extend the feasibility. Permitting use, permitted use and accessory use. Using a permit, use permits in the open space overlay shall be the same as the use permit in the underlying zoning district. Cluster development shall be encouraged and in some cases required. Accessories use permitted in the open space overlay shall be the same as the accessory use permitted. That's said there twice.
We're just basically saying they're not changing zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, wow, it's in there twice. I can't believe it. All right, regulating activity. All activities in this required subdivision or site plan approval shall meet the requirements of this section accepted as follows. Reconstruction of existing structures destroyed by a natural disaster provided that the new structure is the same size in use. Repair and maintenance of septic, sewer facilities and utilities. This is required activities.
Regulated.
Regulated activities.
Let's see, any emergency services or activity that is immediately necessary for the protection and preservation of life, property, and natural resource values. That's regulated. And then agricultural use. So I guess I get back to, is this something that we should have examined, that we should give a model as to something should be accomplished? I guess that's what's coming up. This is going to be implementation going forward. Is this something that we want to put into the implementation for them to feather out, to turn around and make it so it actually fits to town of Grand Island?
Well, I think one of the things, and as Paul, you can answer after me or agree or not agree, but I think that when you define what you're going to make the overlay, I think that the overlay we need to, for today, what happens is where the watershed has to be included all the way up the creek. And then somehow we're going to have to put in some sort of language that, but it could be to be determined, you know, if it changes its path or by a different development going in someplace else, that it has to be re-examined and that there is enough power in the town in the permitting process of a new development going in that it needs to be re-examined. I don't think we can determine. Water is a very different species. Water will find a path.
Yeah. Section F and section G basically is talking to the planning board on what they can do and basically call for cluster development and that kind of stuff. So it's all about implementation as far as the site plan review and the regulations being for the approval of the planning board side. That basically supports what I've just said up at the top part of the document. So to me, it's
The interesting thing,
Go ahead.
one of the interesting things about this is that we're having such a struggle with the tree ordinance here, and you've got a piece of it right here in number 4,
Yes.
you know,
the
under
clarity.
section M. And it's rather casually mentioned, you know, you're not gonna clear cut. So, you know, very straightforward. There's 15 pages of regulations, just one sentence says can't do it. You know, when we put the EEDs together, I was involved in that process. The New York State DEC had a couple of biologists come in and they identified areas to be covered by that EED. Probably you're going to have to use the same approach or something like that to identify what the important stream corridors are. You know, there's some stream corridors that are so wrecked that, you know, I don't know, there's much you can do with them. They'd be candidates for maybe restoration, but then there are others that are very sensitive that need to be protected. And then there are still others that people believe they only exist because trees fell in the waterway and they don't understand the hydrology. So they're trying to blame it on that. It's a very complicated process, but I think we should go through it. We already have EEDs. The precedent's been set here on Grand Island, so we might as well continue it into the LWRP.
I just feel in general, the document, I don't understand, it seems to overstep and be ambiguous when those two things together concern me. I have probably the same verbiage Paul has for different reasons. There's a lot of, you just can't click on where, on the entire property or up to that ABCD property, you know, like, I don't like things that just tell me I can't do something without being very clear about why and where and when. At the decision of a conservation board or at the decision of a developer, I don't like either of those by themselves either. But this seems like I mean, I don't really beat around the bush. It seems like like an anti-development protection document written into a waterfront plan. And if that's what we're doing, then we should say that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I agree with you, and actually, I'm not far off from what you're thinking about. But Jim, this has been in existence in Eden since what, 2016? I think I was reading in there somewhere.
It seems like that was the date.
2001.
2001.
Yeah, it said the addition on 11/14/2001.
Okay, well, so the question I would like to ask Eden is how many times have they been challenged with this thing? Get some idea of what the heck, how the community has dealt with that. If it still exists, they must have dealt with it successfully. I'd like to know how they did that with some cases. Is there somebody in Eden who could come out and tell us how this works?
Yeah, Wendy.
Wendy's from Eden?
Wendy's on the planning board in Eden.
Well, then we need her to come out and tell us how this works.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just throwing it at us like this. I mean, we see a lot of us have got a lot of different questions and concerns about it. So I'd like to see how it works in the real world. And maybe she could give us a presentation on that.
I agree.
Yeah.
That Hartman is the supervisor in Eden. I can contact her.
Yeah. I mean, in general, it really is for the protection of the environment and the protection of the people. In the event there was a flood and to protect our habitat.
Yeah.
Well, see, when I agree with you, and I would like to see the mechanics of how this is done. I mean, I've worked John knows, we all worked in government for a long, long time. You can have all of these rules and regulations, but you have to have a mechanism to run them. And
Right.
So I'd like to know how is Eden's staff to do this? Who analyzes all of this data? Who decides what is done? You know?
I can tell you right now, they're not.
Well, and that's
They're
what
not
I'm,
staffed to do that.
but you know,
They have a shadow of the amount of government we have.
Yeah,
and
then
that's the thing.
Well,
That's the thing. We don't want a junior DEC group that now is up in town hall, walking around, you know what I mean? Deciding you cut down your cattails, here's a
Debbie, we
fine.
don't have the staff to do that. We have enough stuff.
Well,
on the
but
road.
remember, we're talking about the future. We're
I
putting
understand, but
stuff-
you're not gonna put more people on because nobody wants their taxes to go up.
John raises a good
just-
point. And the thing I want to
It's
know,
just
John,
ambiguous.
the thing I want to know about this, John and Eden, is are they winging it or how are they doing it? I mean, who's
Yeah,
making these?
like I said, I
decisions?
would have to get in contact
No.
with Missy Hartman and discuss with her how this actually is enforced.
Yeah.
That's
You
a
know,
real
though,
farming community, by the way. Not, Grand Island's not a farming community. Let's be clear about that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an actual farming community. The application of this is far different in a different environment. And I think it would be interesting still to hear even there, how does it work?
Right.
well, but can I tell you something that just crosses my mind and some of the things that I think about? Think about Washington State for a minute. And think about just different mindsets of how the world is going. And I mean, we can't just let a tent city set up within 100 feet of waterfronts. We can't just let, when we're talking about public policy, we have to think about things that, maybe are not as near and dear to our heart, but could you imagine if just a group came in and just decided to start camping at the beginning of Gun Creek? There in the back,
If you do it on my property, what the outcome would be.
You
I
know,
don't think
at least
I don't
if there
think
is-
This deals with that at all. I don't think this has anything to do with that. I
yeah,
respect.
but I'm just saying,
Well, Debbie, your property abuts Gun Creek?
Please come set a tent up at my house.
no, over probably 100 feet.
Yeah. I think.
But I'm familiar with Gun Creek and the houses on Kirkwood Drive that butt up to it.
Yeah,
They all have, I mean, it's a heavily wooded creek, which is great because when you have trees over the creek, you don't get the cattails and phragmites growing in the creek.
right.
So the shade canopy is wonderful and it helps with that. However, the trees, if they fall down, they're a problem. But most of those places have pretty much mowed access down to the creek. There were docks out there. I don't know if there still are
There are.
anymore, but it's a navigable waterway.
Yep.
Right.
And, I mean, if you try and tell a developer that he's gonna sell a property that butts up to a stream like that, and they can't clear cut or at least have access to that water, what's the point of trying to sell it as a waterfront type property?
Yep.
So,
I
John,
agree.
Okay.
like I told you
I
about,
want to bring this to a conclusion.
talk about who?
all right.
So the conclusion I'm gonna bring it to is, one, we need more information to actually proceed forward. Two, we need a better definition of why we're even entertaining this idea to be put in the WRP itself. It could be something that better fit into the master plan itself versus into the WRP. But we need to get it figured out on if it's something, an overlay that we really need in place, and what is the actual significance of having an overlay in place? And then where does it fit within the document that we're actually developing? So I think that you've all got a good idea of where you want to place your argument when we turn around and bring in Wendy, who she'll be the one to defend this. But at this point, we're not going to put it as far as I'm concerned, it's not being put into the WRP until we have a better idea exactly what its intent is and how we're going to apply it to the plan itself. Is that where we're at?
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fair.
Okay. So thank you for doing that. I thought that was very beneficial because I got nowhere.
Yeah,
But,
no, I agree, yeah.
Perfect. The
That's
next one-
why it's a Zoom meeting.
This next one's a bunch of crap.
The next one is an interesting.
Literally, it's a bunch of crap. Yeah,
It's all about crap.
porta potty.
So the next one we're gonna deal with is gonna be porta potties. I'm on the right page. So this is, everybody got this document?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Read it?
Yes.
You got it in front of you? I don't want to read it
Mhm.
part by part. But porta potties have become an issue to a degree of management within the river corridor more than on the creek corridors because of the fact they're in places where they're not secured, and some are falling over, which are creating hazards within themselves, as well as turn around and polluting the river. And therefore, any regulations, this was looking at regulations to deal with those within our community, as there's more and more of them popping up everywhere. So that's what this one brought forward. The definition for the purpose of this article, the following definitions shall apply in absent to specific definitions within the words phrases. Okay, we're getting into offensive odors. Porta potties themselves, all those definitions within. Boy, I'm losing this one. Woo. This one's coming in, allowable use of porta potties. 1, permitting required information from the owner. Permit duration. I mean, this was quite, man, this is definitely a ordinance of management. Plus a penalty right down the road. So where do we start?
I would just.
Let me tell you, first of all, with respect to porta potties on the river, they save pollution from the river, because if I have a waterfront property and I have a party and it's at night, 90% of the men are going to walk down to the edge of the river and pee right in the river.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, no
so
question about that.
eliminating porta potties for people that have waterfront property will never gain any support as long as I'm town supervisor.
That's a good
They're
start.
not eliminating anything. What they're saying is that when they put them out and you have a party like you talk about, that it doesn't stay there for 4 months, sitting there idle and getting blown over by storms and ending up in the river. Now, that's already happened. That's actual documentation. So if you want to have a party and you want to have it for a week or 2 weeks or whatever there are limitations in this particular thing here. It's
That's
allowable.
bullshit.
Yeah, but
People
why?
use their
Why? You know what?
waterfront
Let's
every
go-
weekend.
Let's go to Fisherman's Landing, and we wanted to put a porta potty down by the water when we were designing it, back in the days when the Greenway funding was coming forth for it. We were told by Erie County, you can't do that because you have a dedicated sewer system that you should be using for discharge of waste, and you shouldn't be using one of those devices.
Okay.
So now, the places where most of these have occurred are actually on in sewer districts on the water line, on the shoreline. So the question is, it's not a question of whether or not it's convenient or not. Actually, it is all about convenience. Then the people don't want to
You're
walk up
right,
to
it
the house
is.
to use the
What it
johns.
is, if a family has a party, a birthday party down there, and there's a ton of children there, and
Right.
someone has to go to the bathroom, the adult has to leave and walk a child up to the bathroom. You're gonna leave 20
Right.
kids unattended at the waterfront? I think that's a whole lot more dangerous.
But John,
than
you're
having a
missing the
porta
point.
potty.
You're missing the point. The permit process says you can do that. You can have something down there.
Paul, we permit the shit out of everything. It's nuts.
Well, if you're gonna stand on just regulatory authority, then why are we even doing this LWRP at all?
Okay, okay. So,
I'm just saying, as far as porta potties go, though, people have them if they are controlled in a certain manner. I support that. However, to just completely say you can have a porta potty for 2 weeks, it's insane. People have waterfront properties that they use every weekend all summer long,
so the
and they
question I
buy
have,
porta potties, and
Okay,
then
the
they
porta potty-
contract the cleaning
Yeah,
of them.
well, listen, John, there's only 4 of them on the river right now that I know of. All 4 of them have not just been there in the summer, they've been there all year long, year
Right.
after year.
I can think of 2 that I know of, friends that I have, and I don't have that many friends on the river, Paul.
Well, okay, then you're right, you got 2 of the 4.
Well, I think there's a lot more than that, is what I'm saying.
Well, I don't know, I've ridden by there, I can't, if they are, they're hidden, I haven't seen them, but at the obvious ones I've seen are 4 of them.
okay. Time out. So the question I have, John, this question is for you. A porta potty's on the site and then it becomes not maintained. What is the course of action for the town and its residents? Is there one?
There isn't.
There isn't.
There is no ordinance in the town of Grand Island that says thou shalt not have a porta potty or thou shalt not maintain a porta potty. I think it comes down to Erie County Health Department regulations.
No, the problem is we went to Erie County last year, when a porta potty in the bad storm last October, a year ago, was blown off the dock and floated in the river and discharged its entire contents. Erie County said it's not our problem, it's Town of Grand Island's problem. Town of Grand Island doesn't regulate those things, so we can't do anything
Okay.
about it either. So the thing sat in the
Well,
water.
I would
the
agree,
entire
Paul, that you can't have them on a dock.
Yeah,
mean,
right.
You know,
Exactly.
I mean, like I said, some regulation as to where they can be located and stuff I can support, but I'm not gonna support not having a porta potty on a waterfront piece of property.
Okay.
I'm not going there, John. I agree with you. They should not be on docks. Probably they should not be they should be a certain distance away from the edge of the water in case there
I
is an
agree,
accident.
100%.
And that, and the other thing that probably done is, make them, consistent with the environment, a color that, doesn't scream out at you bright orange like one I've got down the
100%.
road.
Yep.
You
Yeah,
know,
why not?
I mean,
So,
Exactly. All those things are good.
Those
Okay,
things would be
getting to
fine.
that point, so getting to that point, we don't have any regulations to actually give it boundaries to be there. And I think that the boundary is saying you can have them. I mean, there's no question about it. But the boundary about how to have them hasn't been defined. So would this document be something that would be pursued that were about boundaries, not about permitting would basically set a boundary. But they're allowed to have them. But the question is how.
Can I ask you
Yeah,
a
I
question?
agree.
Annex of the document though, so if we put either of these, like anything like this in, I'm trying to equate it to the long range plan, the master plan, and this is a piece of that, right? So if you put this in, it doesn't make it law.
No,
It doesn't make it anything until the town board votes. I mean, correct. So we're just trying to make a recommendation. But my question is, if someone doesn't want this from the town, does that void the rest of the LWRP document?
no. What this is, these two documents that were presented to us were ideas that were put on the table that felt that they were basically in line with what the corridors, meaning the stream corridor and the river.
Okay.
So this document basically is addressing porta potties on the river, which is the shoreline. So it's within the envelope of the shoreline of the LWRP. The stream corridors in the LWRP, we're stating that the streams are now part of the LWRP all the way to the headwaters. And that's why they're looking at the overlay for looking at open space on the stream corridor management.
So you could adopt the LWRP and neither of these things.
They don't become law, they become part of the implementation. You do it and beat it up and maybe it never happens. Because you're gonna then get to the details where you're not at 40,000 feet, you're at 500 feet. So all we're doing is saying, do we say these are part of implementation, that they will be examined and defined, and if they don't get defined, well, they don't get defined, but they were addressed.
Okay.
Okay, I got a question. I got a question.
You didn't write a sign ordinance, and say it had to be in, we just said, we
Right.
like ordinances.
This is a plan.
This is pretty
This is not-
specific.
Right, this is getting down, both documents are at 40,000 feet. These are saying, go a little deeper and examine these. And if they have merit, then adopt them. If they don't have merit, well, move on.
Judy
So,
has a question.
Yeah, Jim, so what you're saying is that this porta potty thing is just a suggested draft law put before us to look at, to maybe include some kind of verbiage in the LWRP relating to porta potties, but not necessarily suggesting that there be a strict permitting process, that just that there, maybe the town should have one, or what?
right.
I'm trying, I mean, because that's a lot of, that's a law what they're suggesting. That's what I'm trying to get
What
at.
they had done was basically turn around and said, well, they want a porta potty law. So I'm going to give them an examination, I'm going to give them a document that basically says, well, if a law were defined, it would say these kind of things, and then you pick and choose what you want in it. And basically, so she's not drafting a law here. All she's doing is setting perimeters that were just talked about within the conversation we had when we were talking about porta potties. And so I think she threw everything but the kitchen sink in.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we're not putting that whole verbiage in, we wouldn't put that whole verbiage in, because that's just way too much
Yeah.
in my
Yeah,
mind. And I don't like some of the restrictions anyway. I kind of agree with John on this one.
Yeah.
I agree. I agree also. I think this thing is like the Magna Carta for porta johns. That's not what the intent was. You know, I mean, I don't know, where'd this thing come from? Looks like it's pirated from somebody else's ordinance.
I have no idea, but I tell you what, and there was, the porta potty is 2.5 pages, 2.5 pages deep here. You know,
As
I
I,
think
as
it's
I
a
was,
lot easier by saying,
as I was reading through this thing, I'm thinking to myself, this is longer than a lot of the laws we've got from the whole island for everything, you know? I mean, there's,
Not the law,
And you are
that's longer
correct,
than the
Judy, you are
town.
correct. It would have to become a local law, as would the overlay district with respect to setbacks on streams. Those also would
Right.
have to become part of, that would be part of the zoning law.
exactly. I mean, these things would have to go to the planning board, they have to go to the town board, they have to go to public
No.
hearing. I mean,
You're 100% right, Jim.
And how explicit do we have to be? I mean, this is the LWRP, we're not writing laws, we're just
Right.
setting policy, it seems, or
right.
plan. So
The reason
so-
why they're examining these, the reason- and that's why that, that's why they weren't here tonight to let me be beat up on this. But the issue comes down to is, these are two items that showed up as far as things that we should maybe make part of the matrix of things to be accomplished under its implementation. So the question is, do they fit and do we want them in there, or can they be managed in another fashion? But to me, they're far too more complicated to turn around and put into a master plan without really digging into it deeply with some legislation, but.
You know what really messes up?
Well, but
Political.
you know what else I,
Yeah, it does.
Let's do an ordinance for that. Political
Here's what-
side of waterways, that's what we should permit. I would like to do a permit in a law on not placing political signage.
No more political signs on East River and West River.
Start piling on.
Yes.
But
That's
you know
First
what-
Amendment rights,
you
son.
know what
You're
else?
treading in some thin ice.
you know what else you aren't thinking about, if you really think broad spectrum of the two issues brought before us tonight, is that also in the development phase, they put porta potties out as they're developing. So we also have the situation where
That's
This can
addressed
be-
in there.
It's-
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
buried in there that that's okay for a certain amount, and that somebody really took time to make sure the crap was in there.
Yeah.
But I, but it could be toned down to be part of one whole document. Not, we
Right.
don't have to separate them out.
I think
correct,
the
Debbie.
whole thing has been totally overblown here. All I did is I presented them some pictures of showing them how they've been swept off docks and washed into the Niagara River and then left to lay there all winter long. That didn't mean that I wanted a law generated. It just meant that, look, we need to
Right.
start looking at, well, this can happen, all right?
Yes.
Was it a wise decision to put a porta potty on a dock that would go
No.
underwater in the storm? Probably not.
Right.
Yeah, and was it even a wise decision to put it near the shoreline, you know?
But just
Well, and
just
that-
a piece of information, last year over the winter, I'm not defending on the dock. I completely agree with that. But the reason so many porta potties were left out, I had one, it was cleaned out and empty. The guy that rents on the island lost employees, and his employee who helped him gather these up had leg surgery. So he could not gather them up through the winter. So we had some severe windstorms. So, we had to secure ours differently, although it was empty. I'm just saying that last winter was an extreme season for the rental porta potties.
Well, that may be true. and that may be true and I understand it, but we had a storm and this individual down by the South Bridge just decided to put this thing on his dock for some reason. I don't know why. And, he was actually warned about it and told him, it's going to get swept away. And
Well,
sure enough.
Paul, if you're out there
later,
duck
washed
hunting
it right
and you
off the
want to
dock.
shoot ducks and you got to go to the bathroom, you need a porta potty.
Yeah, but you could go to the porta potty on the land. You don't have to go on
Yeah,
the
but-
dock. If you're going to go on
Yeah,
the
but
dock,
you
might as
could
well
open
just
the
go
door and
over-
still shoot your duck this way.
Well, whatever.
I'm sorry.
Yeah,
Too
well,
late.
I think this is really, well, it's good to have the discussion, but I think
You're
this is way
100% right, though. I
overblown.
agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think this can be part of the setback. We could just add the sentences in with the setback rules when
Right.
as we put that into place, after we listen to Wendy.
Right. So, I think this document is going to be a standalone document, and that doesn't necessarily need to be in a very comprehensive plan that's going to end up being looked at by the state and the federal government.
And I don't believe we have to enact any legislation in order to run the
No.
LWRP through. We only are going to suggest what the options could be, right?
Okay, right.
Right.
So,
And the-
I would- yeah, let's. All right, so. Do we want to have this as far as implementation, or you let it stand it on its own merit and let it be another document that can be brought up, not brought up, but a subject be brought up that can be addressed in another forum? Or do we put it in this monster document that we're submitting to the state and the feds?
The issue is water quality, and I just talk about maybe some setbacks and the places where it shouldn't go, but not a wholesale prohibition. And get
Right.
rid of this entire law, because I'll tell you what's gonna happen. You're gonna just draw a lot of gunfire on for no reason.
I get it.
Yeah,
But my question is, do we put it in the LWRP, or do we let it to be a document that's addressed by itself?
LWRP, my vote.
How much of it do you want in the LWRP, Jim? I mean, you just want to say setback for anything from the river, streams?
Address porta potties.
You know,
I guess I don't know how to answer that, Jim. I've been, the only place I've seen them is in the LWRP. I'm sure they're everywhere else. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, the ones that have been a problem. But
Why couldn't you put some language just suggesting things we'd like to see relevant to porta potties, non-play water, some kind of guidance in the document that won't draw somebody's ire and stop the whole document from moving. We could
Yeah.
certainly
Right.
put highlights in there.
Generic statement, Eric, yes.
Right.
Yeah, generic statement, but I think it has to go in the LWRP, because what we're talking about, who wants to drive down the road? And now some of the people have decided they'd put up the fake bushes and try to hide them a little bit, but you don't know what it's like. They would drop them off, and some people would leave them right in the middle of the lawn. And
Okay.
until they moved them up against a building or something, and you drive by and you go, oh, there's a porta potty.
Okay,
And then you think it's only temporary, and then it stays year after year after year.
I understand all the arguments. So the question I have, I'm gonna still put it forward on the same question. Is it gonna be a notation in the LWRP to address porta potties along the stream corridor?
Yes.
I think so. I think it should be, because that's where it could have a major impact.
All right,
Yeah.
so generic is not gonna be as detailed as we got in front of us.
Right.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, but the caveat to that is I don't want to see this language like this in the document.
Okay, good. So it's a generic comment indicating addressing any pollution to be given to the river, including porta potties.
Sure.
Right, they can't be located in an area where they're subject to being blown into the river.
Got it.
Actually, you know what? I think you're on the right track here. Just incorporate it into the other one we just discussed.
The overlay. Yep, it
The
can't be
overlay.
within the overlay.
Yeah,
Simple.
Yeah.
Done.
Well,
to the water.
that's what you get, I don't know. I
sucked
mean,
into the overlay. Okay,
You can have structures in a flood zone, but they can't be, they have to allow water to flow in and out. So I mean, something like a porta potty doesn't do that really. There's some thinking more needs to be done along those lines. A lot of
Yeah.
people have porta potties down along the river that are probably within a flood zone.
I
Right.
know, that's the other part of it,
Yeah.
which is bigger
But,
than,
I don't want to
Be
necessarily.
anchored to the land, not anchored to a
You
dock.
know what? Hey, John, you know what?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you just hit on the key here. The
Yeah.
flood zone. You've got a flood zone line on the Niagara River too. Just put it on the
Yes,
other
we
side
do.
of the flood zone line,
yep,
Okay,
Or
All right.
elevated above the flood zone,
Yeah.
because I mean, we really never know what could happen on a day-to-day basis. I mean,
exactly. I mean, we get a windstorm with a heavy rainstorm, a southwest wind, pushes the water down Lake Erie,
yeah,
raises the water levels along the Niagara River and our shoreline. We don't want to be overtopping these structures and not overtopping them, but flooding into them. And then
Right.
having that sewage flooding back out into the river.
yeah.
Right.
And
Exactly.
it
So
could happen. We can't plan. So
And it-
use the floodplain.
there's a number that you can use to show where that boundary is, right, John?
Yep.
Yes, the FEMA maps are very distinct in that.
Yeah,
regard.
so, it's very simple to put it on the other side of the boundary, and then,
In
you
some
won't have,
cases,
You won't, well, most cases, I mean, you may have to deal with something that, there's always something different on this island, but then, you won't have to worry about the porta potty getting washed down off the river along with the 20 duck hunters that are using it.
That's right.
Right,
So-
and then I think we also need to be pretty clear about the temporary use for the party situations where you think that people are only bringing them in here for a limited amount of time. And then the people that keep them and they sit there and snow gathers on them and they're the same porta potty we see in the spring.
I
Well,
actually don't really
that's-
care.
That's
if
that's
they're-
perfectly,
I-
yeah, there's people that have waterfront and they use their waterfront every weekend. They buy their own porta potties and they just contract to have it
Yeah.
cleaned on every other week or whatever.
That's what I'm
I-
saying. I think we could do something where if your porta potty needed to be somewhere closer, if maybe you didn't have the space or the 100 feet or whatever we decide on the floodplain line, you could bring a porta potty in for 2 weeks or something of that sort, and not necessarily worry
Oh,
about those
Inside the flood
guidelines
zone, you mean?
inside the flood zone if somebody needed to do it, but then if you were going to keep it there temporary, we
Right.
would
But I
have
mean,
rules
I'm talking about people that
could
have,
accommodate.
little, I mean, you drive down East River Road, you get to the north end of the island, there's the houses are on one side and there's little shelters and little cabanas and stuff all the
Right.
way along the river where people,
Yeah.
they summer there. I mean, it's
It's a-
their entertainment for the summer. A beautiful
Yeah,
day.
right.
You go down and you enjoy your waterfront.
Yeah,
That's what we
I'm
do.
just saying, we could
Right.
accommodate.
Well, I mean,
more
like,
than-
so I mean, but if in your situation, if you had a porta potty, probably nobody would see it because of the relief of the road in your area.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, we have one that's 2 doors down from us that you can see it because it's not screened very well. And of course, it's the brightest orange I've ever seen in my life. I don't think they've,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think they own that one. I think that one's just supplied to them. But it sits there all year. It doesn't cause any problems really. And that one was actually put in a place that's very high and well removed from the river. It's the guy that's down by the bridge there that put his on the dock. And after
Yeah.
the thing got washed off the dock, he got it, finally gets another one and he put it back on the dock again.
Okay. What
You
I
can't
like,
fix certain
here's
things.
my assignment to you all. My assignment to you all is take the porta potty law that's been submitted to you and
Okay.
redline out what you don't think should be in it.
Redline and crap out.
Right.
That
So
would be like almost all of it.
Take the
Okay.
crap out.
then you're gonna, what's gonna
That would
happen,
be almost all of it, Jim.
send it back to me at the next
Did you say
meeting.
it out loud, Debbie?
Huh?
Did you say
Oh.
that out loud?
What?
Take the
Take the
crap
crap-
out?
Crap out.
Is this being recorded?
Yeah. That's why he made me say it again.
I bet, yeah, I bet. So, again, take this document, redline it, the daylights out of it, and, I'm gonna expect it back at the next meeting. And then that's what we'll turn around and is basically say, this is kind of like the minimum of what we like to see done with it. But boiling it down to what is it we're trying to accomplish? One is, do we want a permit on it? Do we want to charge for the permit on it? Does it need to be outside the floodplain territory, meaning it can't be on a dock, it can't be on a shoreline that's gonna flood and it's gonna get swept away. It won't be whatever. So if you would turn around and do that to that. The open space one is, the intention will be is for me to bring them all in and get into a better definition of why we want to do this at all. And how does it fit within the plan that we're actually submitting and give a justification to go forward. Does that all make sense?
Yep.
I like it. All
Yeah.
right,
I like
we're done talking about porta potties. And we're done talking about overlays. I don't have any more to discuss other than, I know that, John, thank you for being here. There has been members who have had expressed some ideas about where do we stand on the commission, and I think that maybe you may want to hear from them.
Well, I have some information for you on the town board agenda for October 18th. From John Whitney, Town Supervisor, I'm asking for a resolution to direct the town attorney to draft the local law for the establishment of the Town of Grand Island Strategic Planning Commission and to set a public hearing for Monday, November 1st at 8:00 PM.
Sweet.
Thank you. Thank you.
This is very important to me because this really is where the ultimate direction for the town of Grand Island is going to come from. This is an eclectic board made up of members of each of the different advisory boards. And it's where everybody gets to share their ideas and their input and move us forward.
As been demonstrated tonight, is the area where you get to honestly beat everything up and talk about what will work and why it would work and how it would work, and come up with a direction that really helps move some of the issues important to Grand Island forward. And that's, John, thank you very much for doing that. I think that this board is looking for that stability, its ability to not only be yearly, because in the past we've seen this board established in the 2000s and then disappear under another administration and then come back under another administration. And it's hard to be planning and actually feeling confident in actually voicing our opinions and debating all these issues that are so important to Grand Island.
Yeah.
It's important that they not be politically prone to a dismissal, the drop of an election. And I
Agreed.
applaud you for doing that.
Just on the first, what happens on the first? Is there a point where we can come and speak in favor of, or do you need
Yes,
that?
the public hearing would be November 1st.
November 1st.
So the resolution that I'm proposing is that the town attorney draft the local law creating the commission.
Okay. Is it going to follow what we've been working on for the last?
Yeah, I have this, all that documentation is included in the packet.
Okay, thank you.
That's all I got.
That's all you
Thanks
got.
so much for doing, thanks so much for doing that, John. It's gonna make a big
Yeah,
difference.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
No, it's you know, I want to thank you guys because you guys have spent, you know, all your time working with the respective boards that you do represent, and then you take time to do this as well. So, you know, you're the guys that deserve the credit and the thanks.
Well, I think this is one of the most, to me, it's one of the most rewarding boards that I actually participated in because of the diversity and because of the input and the knowledge that comes to the table.
For the past 30 some years.
Yes.
That's funny.
Yes.
That didn't go unnoticed.
Yeah. Yeah, this is really great, John. This is about moving the island forward in a direction of what really the people who live here want. So,
Right, and it's not
Yeah.
just about, I mean, this group collectively, because this is about moving everything forward. People are going to evolve and move off boards and, you know, we're going to get new people in. But again, the idea is that we have members of each board from traffic safety, from conservation advisory board, from planning board, members from all the different boards that can come in and communicate so they all know where everybody's going and we can move this, make things better in the future.
And
It allows for stewardship of the plan and of a
Yep.
community idea beyond any individual, which I think is not.
That's the
happening,
point. That's
right?
my point exactly, Eric. Thank you.
Right.
Yeah.
and the other thing, John, is you have public members at large that are part of this group too, which you
Right.
don't have on the advisory boards.
Yes.
Yep.
So that gives you another perspective, you know?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. With that, is there, I'll do a roundtable. Anybody got anything you want to add to the effort? So
That was my
Larry,
roundtable
things
item.
going on the Transportation Advisory Board. Larry,
No, I don't have anything.
you have nothing?
No.
All right. If I don't hear anything, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I got one thing.
Oh,
Sorry.
excuse me.
Thursday,
Oh,
coming
yes.
Thursday is our citizen of the year. There are some fantastic, as there usually are, but there's really a great slate of folks who are being honored this year across a lot of spectrum of service, which is really humbling to read through the winners and even the people who were nominated awards. So there's some great folks. It's Thursday. There's still some tickets available. And the event is really meant to show these people that we're thankful for them and the work they've done, and to give them a little day in the sun. Most of them do most of the work very quietly, very humbly. So if anybody, you can make it out, I know it's one of those like, we got something going on. If you can make the time, I think it's very important. And the chamber's at a stance in its existence too, where we need to decide what's important, what we get behind and run every year. And I really feel this is important, and I think attendance helps. So anybody you can encourage to get out, we really appreciate it. That's all. Sorry.
And I would have.
Rhonda made my reservations today, I believe.
And I got mine too.
Well, and it's awesome that Diane Evans, who's been part of this board for the last 5 years, is basically one of the awardees. And I think it's to me, I've always said she was a jewel that, and she told around and told us at the meeting that she's only going to attend 2 more meetings, and then she's done with us. She's going back to her own board, and it's going to be sorely missed here. But to see her get the award is just, I mean, we know what she is.
Well, I
And
also,
now-
if I could take a minute, I'm sorry, but Judy was awarded last year, and it was a very tough year. We did it digitally. It was so hard to decide to do it, to not do it. And I still feel bad. We go, like we didn't give those people what we could. It's so hard to balance. Paul's a past winner. So I think there's a real group of people whose hearts are in the right place and do a lot of work. But Judy is phenomenal. And I still feel, I see her face, I feel bad, like we should run another date. It was just so hard last year, but that support means a lot.
Yeah, I
So-
wish I could be there, Eric, but I'm out of town right now, and I won't
I'm
be
still
back.
gonna talk about you a little bit, so you can watch the playback.
Well, I'll do that. I'll do that. Yeah, I really would have liked to have attended, but I'm visiting with my kids down in Tennessee right now, so
That's awesome.
But- to have taken the time, thank God for some Zoom meetings, so I can still visit with you all every once in a while and
Right.
attend some meetings. Thank you.
Here we got you on technology, so bottom line, it'll get you going.
Oh, yeah. That's next week, right? Or when? I don't know.
Say hi to your brother for
I'll
me.
entertain, if there's no more comment to be made, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
So first,
Second,
Second?
second.
Again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us tonight. It's always rewarding to get into conversations with you all. So have a good week.
Thank you.
take care.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.
Bye.